This is the hard knock life, but not the chicka kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share the interest together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind.
Welcome back to another episode of Hard NOC Life. I am your host, Keith Chow, and we're doing an episode today that is about a year and a half in the making. As you know, I wrote a post back in 2014 about why the upcoming Netflix Marvel series Iron Fist should star an Asian American lead. Of course, in the time since I wrote that post, Netflix has debuted not only Daredevil, but also Jessica Jones, and also Luke Cage is in the middle of filming right now in New York City. And the fourth series of their planned Defenders quadrilogy is Iron Fist, and yet to be cast, yet to be, I guess it's been greenlit, but yet to be announced. So we thought it would be a great opportunity to use this episode to kind of talk about why we continue to think that casting an Asian American lead makes the most sense for that show, especially on the heels of the success of Jessica Jones and how great that show is. We should be talking about what the next shows look like. And to have that conversation tonight, I brought on a couple guests that I think can speak to why we need an Asian American Iron Fist. If you've been following Twitter or have just been on the internet over the last few weeks, you may have seen conversations roll around about that precise topic, primarily fueled by an article written in Fusion. My first guest is the comics culture writer for Fusion.net, and welcome to Hard NOC Life, Charles Pulliam-Moore.
Thank you so much, Keith. It's nice to be here.
You were one of the lone voices in the wind talking about why Iron Fist should be Asian American. I set the stage for maybe. Let me take it back. I didn't start the idea of having an Asian American Iron Fist. That thing has been kind of flowing under the radar for a long time. I mean, as a comics reader, as an Asian American comics reader, I used to assume he was Asian when I was a kid. I think a lot of people do. So what compelled you to write about why Marvel's next superhero should be Asian?
Well, so I'm a comics writer. I'm a big nerd, big Marvel fan. Iron Fist was not one of the characters that I was super keyed into. One of the things that all the new Netflix heroes have in common, Daredevil aside, is that they might not necessarily, they're not like top tier heroes. They're street level, and not only street level, they're people that not everybody knows about. Iron Fist, I want to say, is sort of like one of the more esoteric people in the universe, and so when I heard about all the series coming out, I started digging around, looking into Iron Fist. You see pictures of him, you see him in the iconic green suit with the yellow mask, and the more I sort of read around about him, I finally came across a scene from a Spider-Man show where Iron Fist is currently a character where he has his mask off, and he's a white guy. And I was like, no, shenanigans, what's this about? Then the more I sort of dug into it, I realized that there was this conversation about the necessity for Iron Fist to be Asian, and that was coming off of the heels of Marvel itself talking about how it wanted, more Chinese characters in its films to appeal to Chinese audiences, so it all sort of came together at this moment that seemed like now is the perfect time for Danny Rand to be reinvented as reimagined rather as a character of Asian descent.
Right. Well, it's really fascinating too, because as I said, with all of the other Netflix heroes, you have a lot of representation, right? Because Jessica Jones represents Marvel's first, well, not first because the Agent Carter came first, but first superhero, female superhero to have her own show, because Agent Carter is not a superpowered person. But you also have Luke Cage, who's African American, and you have even Daredevil is a person with disabilities. He's blind, and so you have all this representation that Iron Fist would be the sole privileged white guy that there aren't thousands of already in superhero comics.
Right. The thing that I personally love about the Netflix corner of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is it's kind of like their skunk works almost for sort of what the future for the MCU can be. If you talk to exec types, or we don't know how these characters will test in audiences, and so you get characters like an all-American Captain America, and then you have sort of this idealistic Thor, who's this tall, muscular white guy. You have Tony Stark, and then you have Black Widow. You get white person after white person after white person, and then every now and then you'll get a War Machine who's, they're in the periphery, and then you'll get like a Falcon who's like, a sidekick, like, hey, go find my assassin friend, and then Falcon flies off. But they're never sort of like, they're never sort of like at the center. And like you said, with Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, and Daredevil, they are these people for whom they are not like your traditional leading types, and they're at like the center. And Danny Rand is the perfect opportunity to finally put an Asian character at the forefront. The closest thing we've gotten so far to like leading Asian characters are Ming-Na Wen and Chloe Bennett's characters on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But even then, they're a part of an ensemble, and right. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is never really about them. It is about S.H.I.E.L.D. and they are right. sort of parts of it. But yeah, it's to say that making Iron Fist Asian makes perfect sense is almost an understatement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the other funny thing about Iron Fist too is that of all the Netflix series that were announced way back in 2013, even I think,
yeah.
They announced those 4 shows at the same time. Right now, not only have we gotten both Jessica Jones and Daredevil like released out in the world, they've been released to critical acclaim, so much so that Daredevil is actually getting a 2nd season before we see the other series. But there was talk about Iron Fist. There was no talk about Iron Fist, right? So we had Daredevil come out, we had Jessica Jones come out, we had Luke Cage is currently shooting, but we haven't heard anything about Iron Fist, and so much so that over the summer there were all of these reports about Netflix maybe considering canceling Iron Fist. There was talk about the Punisher, who's going to be in Daredevil season 2, maybe taking that place, possibly just turning it into a movie and forgetting about it altogether. And part of the reason why that was weird is that this was announced at the same time as the other 3 shows, but we haven't heard anything about casting. We haven't heard anything about just production. They don't have a screenwriter, a showrunner, or a director. Nothing in place. In fact, Jeff Loeb, who runs Marvel Television, only recently came out and said, "Oh, don't worry, guys, it's still happening," on the heels of Jessica Jones' success. So, one of the things that kind of like lack of news has helped us, as far as the Nerds of Color, is helped us continue fan casting who we'd want to play Iron Fist in that eventual series. And one of those actors happens to join us tonight. You may be familiar with his work if you've watched the 9th season of So You Think You Can Dance. He got all the way up to top 6. He was also played the iconic Bruce Lee on Broadway for David Henry Hwang, who hope you'd feel better, David. And he is also one of the top candidates to play Iron Fist. He's actually my #1 candidate. I wrote about it a few weeks ago as well. Welcome to Hard NOC Life, Cole Horibe.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you on. As I told you earlier, I was a big fan of yours when you're on So You Think You Can Dance. I may or may not have voted for you while you were on the show. So, thank you. Like Charles, how did you kind of feel about having your name attached to this idea of Iron Fist? Were you familiar with the character before all of this kind of came about?
I was not. It wasn't until one of my friends, I think, linked me to one of the articles you wrote, and that's where it had my name attached to it with Harry's, and I was like, who is this Iron Fist? I don't know. I only knew like the major ones, Hulk, Spider-Man. So that's when I started researching into the character, and yeah, it's a really fascinating character.
And then, so what after you started reading about it, what did it make you consider, like, maybe this is something I could maybe do one day?
I mean, to be honest, no, because I didn't think that, like, I don't think Marvel would be open to going, I don't know, Asian with a superhero. I don't know. Since I've grown up, all the superheroes have always been Superman, Batman, all these white, I don't know, superheroes. Mm-hmm. So because it hasn't happened yet, I don't know, it just didn't cross my mind as a possibility.
Right, and it's funny too, right? Because he's a martial artist, and
Yeah.
One of the pushbacks that I've gotten ever since I wrote my piece on the Nerds of Color about why Danny Rand should be Asian American is this notion that it's actually racist for an Asian American to be a martial artist on screen, and I find that an interesting argument because, one, that's like totally white-splaining my culture to me, but also two, Cole, you are a martial artist. You were a very renowned martial artist. What do you think of that argument that it's racist for Asians to portray martial artists on screen?
I think it's only racist if the martial artist is a not developed character. It's just, you know, a guy who's there to kill and do action sequences and has no, you know, has like a few lines, no emotions, you know, no emotional range, can't get the woman, that kind of thing. I think that's when it becomes a problem. I don't think martial arts per se is a problem, and it's, you know, it's a part of our culture that I'm really proud of, and a lot of us are proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and that's the argument that I made in my piece. This idea that, you know, simply being Asian and performing a martial arts on screen makes it stereotype, I think misses the point that, you know, the art itself there's nothing stereotypical about it, and if the character can be three-dimensional, if he can be all of those things that you were saying that most of the times Asians don't get to play on screen. It doesn't matter what he does, right? He could be a brawler, he could be a martial artist. It doesn't matter. He gets to be a three-dimensional character. And so, Charles, this idea that, you know, Danny Rand is more than a martial artist, right? Like, because he's got superpowers. You know, he's got glowing fists, and he's a lover, and he's a rich guy. Like, he's not just like a stoic Jackie Chan type character, right?
What people tend to forget about, you know, the origin stories of most superheroes, you know, superheroes of color or, you know, white heroes, you'd be hard pressed to find a hero whose like abilities weren't somehow grained in some kind of like extrapolation of like a cultural generalization. Oh, Iron Fist as a character is inexorably linked to Kung Fu, right? If you look back at where Iron Fist comes from, Marvel's like, all right, you know, Kung Fu movies are really big right now. How can we capitalize on that? So, like, let's create our Kung Fu character. You've got his love interest, Misty Knight, and they're like, all right, how can we work blaxploitation in the comics? Like let's make a Foxy Cleopatra type, you know. This idea that what I'm getting around to is like all throughout Marvel, there are these characters who, because they're three-dimensional, the fact that certain aspects of their abilities or origin stories could be like a problem. Perfect example, you've got like Storm. I was going to go with Brother Voodoo, but I'll go with Storm because she's a little more accessible. You know, a very like small-minded read on Storm could be like, oh, she's a black woman who's like a fertility goddess, and you know, you could get back into old ideas about black women, you know, sort of being procreators and these really sort of base ideas about black women's bodies. But the thing that makes Storm a vibrant and popular and powerful character is that over, you know, the decades that she's existed, writers have fleshed her out in these very complex and interesting ways. And the same is true of Iron Fist. You know, like if you look into his origins and his stories and the interactions that he has with the people of Kunlun and with Heroes for Hire and the Avengers, he is really, like, the Kung Fu is almost sort of like backdrop for him. You know what I mean? It's sort of like when you explain his abilities, as was what you have to do with heroes, you go like, oh, he's like a magical Kung Fu artist. But that's really sort of like one of the least interesting things about him. It's sort of like what he brings to the table as, you know, as a hero. The fact that he is a philanthropist and a businessman, and depending on like which continuity, a father and a teammate. You know, there's all these things that together make Danny Rand much more than just, you know, a faceless ninja. You know, he's not just like a random hand ninja. He is, you know, the Iron Fist. So, yeah.
And I think the irony, right, the irony of the argument that making Danny Rand Asian American in the Iron Fist show is racist is the fact that all the other Asians that are going to be on the show are going to be just that. Silent ninja types who don't get to have any depth. Or if they do have any depth, it's because they're the bad guy. Right?
Right.
I'm pretty sure Steel Serpent is still going to be Asian and still going to be the bad guy, right? Like, so it's not like there's, you know, by making Danny Asian that you erase the stereotype of the Asian martial artist Iron Fist, right, Cole? Like, if you don't get the part of Danny Rand, they might cast you as the silent ninja guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. It would actually be a huge breakthrough in so many levels. I mean, if you look at any of the Marvel superheroes, nobody really looks at them as, you know, the typical like flat character that just is there to do action sequences. I mean, they're fully fleshed out, really interesting characters, and it's all about their stories and their character development and everything they go through, their relationships. And so, I mean, that's the kind of character that, I don't know, that needs to be represented for Asians. I don't know. I think it's just a huge breakthrough.
Well, and I think the other thing about like why martial arts shouldn't be considered a hindrance for an Asian American. I mean, you know, the greatest, probably the most famous Asian American celebrity that's yet to exist was Bruce Lee, right? Like, and he is the embodiment of someone who embraces the idea of martial arts, but it transcends just that stereotype, right? Like Bruce Lee was a philosopher, and again, he was a lover, and he was a thinker, and he was cool, right? Like you got the chance to play Bruce Lee. I mean, that's already big shoes to fill, Cole. What does Bruce Lee as an icon, as an Asian American icon, as a style icon, as a martial arts icon? How does that play into this notion that, you know, we are limited by this quote unquote stereotype?
It's interesting. I don't know. Playing Bruce Lee, I felt a lot of similarities, like with my own fight, as you know, a person in the industry of entertainment. His whole thing was, he didn't want to play like the whole subservient Asian thing, and you know, so he wanted to break through, and he was like the first one to be, you know, to show that we can be strong and masculine, and you know, and all that, and not just be, I don't know, the typical nerdy type. And I feel like the battle is still continuing in a way to break through like all the stereotypes of like, okay, now we can be seen as martial artists, and that's great, or as strong, and that's great. But then like now we have to be flat characters. You don't have emotions, can't get the woman, and all that kind of thing. I don't know. I think it's a continuation of that battle that he fought.
And I think, you know, one of the iconic stories that the Bruce Lee, the kung fu play on Broadway, kind of touched on is the idea that, you know, back in the 70s, Bruce wanted to do, or I'm sorry, back in the 60s, Bruce wanted to do this show called The Warrior, where he was the main character, where he was the lead, and the studios said, nah, we don't think a Chinese guy is going to be able to lead a show, and so they cast David Carradine famously in the role of the show. Eventually became Kung Fu, the series, and David Carradine became like this iconic character over decades. And I think one of the things about that argument is the same argument that's continuing today when people, you know, counter the idea of an Asian American Iron Fist, is that it just doesn't make sense to make Iron Fist Asian, right? Like, he's not going to be able to lead a show. And it's funny because we live in a world where shows like Fresh Off the Boat exist, where Dr. Ken exists, where Quantico exists, where the Mindy Project exists, where all of these shows featuring Asian American, Master of None exists now. Even Into the Badlands is kind of like a you know, a way for them to correct. And I think the creators of the show talked about, like, this is their, you know, way of their course correction for what Kung Fu ended up being. So like, we actually live in a world where it may make sense to make a superhero an Asian American, right, Charles?
I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, one of the rumors surrounding the Iron Fist production, aside from there being various power struggles within the Marvel corporate structures, people have been moved around, has been that there was a hesitation. Like, Iron Fist was always supposed to be the last of the 4 Netflix series to come out before they had their team up, the Defenders. And the thinking was that Iron Fist would come last, specifically because it would require the most leap of faith on the part of the readers. You know, the TLDR version, you have Daniel Rand, who is hiking with his father in the mountains, you know, off the grid, and then he gets sucked into a magical dimension that is populated by, you know, mystical Chinese-like people who fight dragons, and one person is chosen amongst them all to, you know, become the Iron Fist. And then we're supposed to believe that Daniel Rand also, you know, from time to time goes back to Kunlun, the land where, you know, he was sort of reared, but is also managing, you know, multi-billion-dollar business. You know, there's all these things that sort of require a lot of dense, nerdy backstory, and then, you know, and that's sort of like the reasoning as to why Netflix has been sort of like iffy about whether it's coming out. Of all the things that you can do to make Iron Fist easy to digest for new, you know, for people who are looking at it not necessarily as another installment in the Marvel universe, but as a new Netflix series, the easiest thing in the world that you could do, just to make it more palatable, make him Asian. You know, to sort of to explore that dances with wolves dynamic. Like, if you're going to do that, just have that be the story. But to sort of weave that into another character who's already complex as is, just, it's almost like adding too much of a seasoning, you know, to a pot. Like, just don't do it.
Right.
A character like Iron Fist needs to be relatable, I feel, and to say that making Iron Fist Asian would be a mistake is to sort of discount the number of Asian fans out there, people who want to see themselves reflected in the character.
Well, the other thing too about Netflix is that, you know, if they were to go the traditional route and go ahead and cast another blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, probably named Chris, to play Danny Rand, it would you know, and then like you were describing, it would require at least several episodes of this young white guy going into this mystical land and
Right.
kind of being a better Asian than the Asians that are already there. And like
Right.
Netflix already had that show, right? Like they did Marco Polo last year. Like, why did they need to redo?
And everyone loved Marco Polo so much. It did so well. My goodness. It's also
Like, what's the point?
right. Like, what's the point? Like you said earlier, we have Marvel. Like, superheroes are classed into like different sets based on their abilities. All of the Netflix characters are street level. They're all like fisticuffs types. But if you like step back at the larger landscape for superheroes, there are so many white guys who either travel to or get trapped in the East and then become the best of the Easterners. It is a problematic trope within superhero movies that like need not be done again. If only for the fact that like I think we can all agree that Netflix has pretty much done a good job with all of its series, barring like Luke Cage being terrible, which I don't think that it will be. A gaffe like this would really sort of make it difficult to enjoy the show. You know, I can't, like, if I were to play devil's advocate, I don't know that I could legitimately think of reasons that keeping Danny Rand, a white guy, would like make the show objectively better. Like, what do I get out of that? Like, I myself don't think that I could relate to Danny Rand to begin with. And then to see a white guy, you know, doing the Avatar thing where nobody can tame the dragon and yet you've tamed the dragon, it doesn't strike me as a moment of triumph. It just seems like narrative sloppiness almost. Shoehorning this archetypical character into this role that's already interesting, for the sake of whom? Not for, you know, like not for my enjoyment, but rather for, you know, for this person that I just like can't relate to. Nah.
Right. Well, Cole, that's actually, you know, one of the arguments against making Danny Rand not just Asian, but just making Danny Rand not white is this idea that, you know, Danny Rand's whiteness is central to his character. That he's, you know, the whole point of Danny Rand is that he goes into this weird country and he becomes their champion, and it teaches him tolerance. It teaches him how to accept other people, so that when he comes back to New York, he can partner with a black guy and be like the heroes for hire. Like if he wasn't white, that wouldn't happen. Like, what do you think about this idea that like his whiteness is central to who he is as a character?
That's the part that people actually forget, is that Asian American is very different from Asian. So like him going to Kunlun is kind of like me going to Asia. Like growing up as a kid, I never thought of myself as, you know, I always thought of myself as American, and then people from Asia as like, if I was to, I've never been to Asia, but when I would meet people from Asia, I thought, you know, of us as completely different. Our cultures are so different. Everything about us are really different. So if I was to go to Asia now and try to live there, and you know, it would be such a cultural shock for me, and I would just have to learn everything, their ways, and I don't know, I would stick out like a sore thumb. I would definitely be a foreigner there, you know. So, and it's more interesting too, because it's like you like reconnecting with your roots, you know, like learning about, like, I don't know, where your ancestors came from, kind of a thing too. That could be an interesting kind of concept to explore.
You know, we've all seen those very special episodes where you talk to your parents and, you know, you go back to the motherland and you're a fish out of water, and after 30 minutes to an hour you've learned a very special lesson, and then you just go back to, you know, wherever it is that you came from. But like a series focusing on like even like I in my like my let's say I'm writing fan fiction for a moment, even if like Daniel Rand had a pre-existing connection to Kunlun that he did not know about, like if he is literally of if he is one of them and yet he just did not grow up there, coming to terms with like reconciling, you know, his modern American identity with like the Kunlun identity, that's fascinating. You know, it's not so much the fish out, you know, the I don't want to say fish out of water, but literally just like watching someone interact with like a destiny that's been set in place for them while also grappling with being a fundamental outsider and never really being able to like magically jump over that barrier. The most problematic thing about Iron Fist in my mind is always that there's very little pushback to the idea that he is the Iron Fist, right? It's just sort of like, oh no, you beat everybody else, you beat the dragon, it's yours. You know, there's never sort of any like conflict of identity, which is the core of what makes all of like the Netflix Marvel heroes really tick, right? There's that internal struggle that they have to deal with. That is their ultimate struggle, in addition to, you know, whichever evil they're fighting. You know, with Jessica Jones, it's like, what is my identity post having been in a deeply abusive relationship with Kilgrave? With Matt Murdock, it's like, I am a beacon of justice in a Hell's Kitchen that is rotten to the core. You know, for Iron Fist, in my mind, I would be very interested in seeing someone grapple with the problematic nature of being an outsider and then becoming the chosen one. You know, and it's so often, you know, we see the chosen one become chosen, and they're like, okay. Like, I guess that's just going to be this movie. And, you know, you can, I guess it's fun to watch, but after a while, you see this movie again and again and again, and think to yourself realistically, what would it mean, like, what would a reluctant Iron Fist look like almost? Someone for whom, like, becoming the one is both a blessing and a curse. That, to me, is way more interesting than just seeing, you know, some guy take victory laps.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the to kind of like jump off that for a second, like the idea that you know, we talked about earlier, that Asian, like combining a martial artist with Asianness is in itself like a trope that we don't want to perpetuate. I think the idea of like the white chosen one who goes into like a community of color to become their chosen one is just as stereotypical and just as tropey as that. In fact, it's more tropey, right? Like, there's never been an Asian American chosen one. There's been,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess Keanu kind of counts, but like other than that, as far as like the chosen one, you know, there's like Snake Eyes. I can list a bunch of people like Snake Eyes and Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai, and like, you know, all of these people coming into like a community of color and becoming their chosen one is a tired trope that Iron Fist, I think, can transcend if they go another way.
Wait, Snake Eyes, we're talking G.I. Joe?
Snake Eyes is not Asian.
No! No!
Did
No!
I just blow your mind? Snake Eyes.
I've never been. I am familiar enough with Snake Eyes to know the franchise he is from. He wears a mask, right? Like he wears like a blackout mask.
See, he wears. So this growing up, and I've actually told Larry Hama, who's actually Japanese American, who created Snake Eyes and created all the G.I. Joe characters. I've actually had this conversation with him. Like, as a child growing up, I loved G.I. Joe. And Snake Eyes was my favorite character because, you know, I just always assumed he was Asian because, one, you never saw his face. He wore this completely, you know, like this is what, if you're not familiar, this is what Snake Eyes looks like. This is like a Mighty Mugs version of Snake Eyes. But he wears a full, you know, covered face, and he's mute. He doesn't talk. He can't talk. And he's this black-clad ninja. So, like, you know, it's easy to imagine yourself under that mask. And then he's disfigured too, and his name is classified, his origin is classified. You don't know where he's from, so you just can imagine he can be anybody. And then there was an issue of the G.I. Joe comic book where he takes his mask off. You don't see his face, but his hair is like blonde, and you're like, what the fuck? He doesn't talk. He can be anybody. You gotta give him blonde. You couldn't even at least give him like dark brown hair. You know,
something that a lot of people who are like against the Asian Danny Rand crusade, no one sort of points out the fact that like Iron Fist is not like a singular identity. Like there are Iron Fists, plural. Like there's a line of Iron Fists, and a number of them have been Asian. A number of them have been people of color. It's not as if, like, I feel as if a lot of people who are attached to the character. They are attached to Danny Rand in this singular, immutable identity, which really sort of like, if you're a real fan and you're like into the mythos of it, then you have to respect that like this is an identity that is not fixed. It's not as fixed as people make it out to be. And I mean, like, you guys, we have done Stranger Things in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to fit into stories. Jarvis was a person. He was not the Vision. Nick Fury was not always black, and yet now he is. Also, mutants don't exist anymore, you guys. Like, let's not sit up here and pretend that this would be. Let's not sit up here and pretend that this is
where you draw the line, right?
Yeah.
Make Iron Fist. Well, and I think that's the other thing too, because on the Nerds of Color, we've actually collaborated with another website called the MCU Exchange, who their primary focus is on writing about Marvel and the cinematic universe, and we've actually collaborated on a series of posts about how they can use our premise of making Danny Rand Asian American fit into the continuity of not just the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but like paying respect to the Iron Fist mythos and still making it all make sense. And part of that idea is that and I think before we went on air, Charles, you alluded to the Fraction Brubaker books that came out a few years ago. And one of the things that I would be willing to concede that you keep Orson Randall as a prior Iron Fist, and you can keep him white. I don't care.
Yeah.
Let Orson Randall be there, and let Orson Randall be white. Let Ray Park play him, for God's sake. And then, Wendell Rand and Danny Rand should be Asian characters.
Yeah.
that take the name Rand to honor Orson's. This is a concept that came up. MC Nadelsky, who writes for MCU Exchange, came up with this idea that let Wendell Rand be Asian, because why would a little white kid be running around the mountains of the Himalayas to be adopted by Orson Randall to begin with? Let Orson continue to be white, then you can have your white Iron Fist, but the main character, Danny Rand, should be Asian, or at least mixed race Asian American, and it all still makes sense. It all still fits, and I think that's there's nothing that and we've laid out point by point why it still fits in the mythos and it still fits in continuity with the cinematic universe, and
nothing is lost.
Nothing is lost. I think we've solved it, guys.
Of all the things to get up in arms about with Iron Fist, literally, guys, small potatoes. Just let it go. Like, we have to deal. With the thing that people should be pumped about or more focused on, I think, is the fact that this is going to be.
That's happening. You're getting an Iron Fist show.
It's gonna right. It's happening. It's gonna be like, you guys, like, magic doesn't really exist in the Marvel universe yet, but like this is pretty much gonna be it. Like, this is this is like a groundbreaking moment that we should all be clamoring for it to be like as best as it possibly could.
Yeah.
Also, just come on, let's go. We
It's 2015.
The Avengers are looking really nice right now. We've got 2 black guys and 2 women on it, and yet, like, let's not sit here and pretend that that's enough.
Right.
Something that I wrote in my post about Danny Rand. If Danny Rand ends up being a white guy, then the Defenders still technically becomes 3 white people and a token black guy.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly right.
And it's sort of like, I recognize that that's looking at it as glass half full, but like, we can't just sit around and be like, oh no, that's enough diversity, that's enough representation. We're good. It's fine. Everything is fine. We've got like a handful, no more.
Right.
Just because. To keep this franchise going, you're only going to do yourself. You're doing yourself nothing but favors by casting this net as broad and wide and as deep as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And again, just having that face up there, you cannot underestimate the power of a young kid seeing someone who looks like them. To buy into a franchise,
right?
It's ridiculous.
Well, to be fair, we've all seen Cole with his shirt off, and none of us look like you. So that said, what is appealing about for yourself, Cole, to play a character like Danny? Right? What would be the appeal to you as an actor to get a role like that, or to play a character like that?
Just that it's like it would be the first. It would be like a huge breakthrough in so many ways that hasn't been done before. Like you have the leading man. He's cool. He has like a really cool story. He's really well developed. And then he's witty. He's like that multi-billionaire. I don't know. He's a guy he's like the Batman guy that kids will look up to and be like, oh, I want to be like that. That's cool, or whatever. And yeah, it's just like it's really an acting role, and then the martial arts is like the cake, the icing on the cake rather. So I feel like that for me would be, I don't know. There's just so many things. Like those are the main things. It's a breakthrough in so many ways, and it would be the first Asian American leading man superhero.
And for you, I mean, you would get to like exercise those acting chops, but also you get to also show off your martial arts skills, right? Like that's, I think one of the challenges is finding a person who can do the acting as well as the martial arts, and vice versa. So I think that's something that I think appeals to you as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, they're both my passions. I mean, I started doing martial arts when I was 4 or 5 years old, all the way through, did all different disciplines.
and I think also as a dancer, right? Because like when you do martial arts on film, it's really about choreography as much as it's about skill. So you have your dance background too that helps as a martial artist. Yeah,
the dancing helps you to not only pick up choreography better, but to be really aware of of movement, of your body, your positioning, what looks good. You're just really well aware of your body and the aesthetics of it.
I mean, again, I've put it out there already many times that I think Cole is one of the best options for Marvel to consider. So hopefully, Jeff Loeb, you're out there and you're watching this, or you're listening to this podcast, please, give Cole's agent a call, because I think, again, I mean, I'm not just saying this because he's on the show. I've written about it a lot. I think the idea that Danny Rand, because when if you ever go to any message boards, you see people writing about who, fan casting Danny Rand, who should play Danny. The biggest thing is like they want to find an actor who can do martial arts, and they really try really hard to find like white actors who can do martial arts, and nothing against white actors who know martial arts, but I think again the idea of the white martial artist is not a new idea, right? You're not breaking ground by having a white guy be like the super awesome martial artist. Honestly, I feel like you're breaking ground by having an Asian American do that, because we haven't seen that, right? Because Bruce Lee was not able to do that. He had to go back to Hong Kong to make his movies.
Yeah.
He wasn't able, like we were talking about The Warrior, he wasn't able to make this Asian American martial artist, other than maybe Enter the Dragon. So I think it's actually more revolutionary. Daniel Wu's doing it right now in Into the Badlands. It's actually more revolutionary to have an Asian American be a martial artist than a white guy at this point.
Yeah.
I also think that if we just looking at the way that Marvel has approached, or rather that Netflix has approached its Marvel shows, you've got Daredevil being like your detective procedural, and then Jessica Jones being like a neo-noir kind of series. I think that looking at Iron Fist as an opportunity to do like an art house martial arts series is the way to sort of look at this, and to think of it as just being like straight up martial arts is almost to limit what the series could end up being. You know what I mean? Just in the way that more Marvel properties are starting to branch off their superhero films or superhero properties second, and more sort of of another genre first. If Winter Soldier was a superhero movie, but it was also a political thriller,
right? Ant-Man was a heist movie.
Right, and the idea of an Iron Fist that is more, just this is the first that comes to mind, that's more like Crouching Tiger as opposed to an Inch at the Fist is fascinating to me. That it's, again, it's another entry point for people who don't necessarily identify themselves as fans of the superhero genre proper. And again, to cast a white guy in a leading role for that kind of production would just seem like not quite right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is an opportunity for not only Marvel, but just for geek nerd pop culture in general to have more characters of color represented, because I think in the Entertainment Weekly controversy this week about Black Panther on the cover, I think is a perfect illustration of that. This idea that superheroes of color is such a new concept for people that they don't know how to. Superheroes of color is such a new concept for white people that they don't know how to act, right? I mean, Black Panther, who's been, people have been waiting for his debut for decades, right? he's finally getting his time in the spotlight. And I mean, to be fair, Entertainment Weekly puts him on the cover, but they also kind of put him at the back of the bus and kind of like emasculate the character in their kind of like captioning on the cover. You know what I mean? So like there's this idea that like because we don't have enough representation of people of color in the superhero fandom. I mean, we'll talk about entertainment writ large at another topic, but just in superhero nerd comic book culture, I think this is something that we're still trying to like figure out how to do, right?
And it's like if you were to look at the catalog of characters who are Asian for Marvel in particular, the list is kind of tiny as far as like characters who are big enough name to warrant solo series in particular. One of the big drawbacks to the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that some of the more iconic Asian characters are mutants. One of the side effects of Stan Lee coming up with the concept of mutants was that writers didn't really have to come up with these complex backstories to ground them in any way, and so you've got a bunch of like people who happen to be mutants who are from all over Asia, and bam, like almost like representation in a box. But we don't have that now,
right?
And so.
And they all get killed 5 minutes into Days of Future Past too, right?
Right. Like Blink was great. Fan Bing Bing did a great job, and
Storm,
Bishop just gone. And I don't want to wait for Chloe Bennett to have a role in Inhumans, which may or may not be coming out. Like I don't want to wait that long. Like it seems like if that is the plan, then it's almost like a slap in the face.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you brought up this line of reasoning too, because I think the other pushback that I've gotten over the months and years that I've been talking about this idea of Asian American Iron Fist is the idea that well, there's Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi is Charles talked about earlier in the 70s when Iron Fist was created. Marvel also created Shang-Chi, who was the master of kung fu, who was basically a Bruce Lee analog. Who was the son of Fu Manchu, believe it or not. So like a lot of the pushback that I get is that, well, if you make Danny Rand Asian, you're basically just making Shang-Chi, not ignoring the fact that, like as Cole said earlier, we're saying Asian American, so that's one difference. Two, Shang-Chi, even if like basically saying you can't have more than one Asian martial artist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Like there can only be one. So if you make Danny Asian, then you've erased Shang-Chi. I'm like, no, they can both be in like the universe, right? Like you're kind of new to the universe, but like what do you think, Cole? Can there be room for like more than one Asian martial artist?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, most of the superheroes, or a lot of them, know martial arts. They're all martial artists.
Right.
But also, I think Shang-Chi, it's a character from Asia. She's fresh off the boat, and it's like again perpetuating the stereotype that Asians can't be Asian Americans. We can't be Americans here. It's like there's a large percentage of us here who are American, and we want to be represented.
Right.
And it's also a different character. I mean, Shang-Chi doesn't really have superpowers. He's just like Bruce Lee.
Exactly. and again, he's not a multi-billion-dollar corporate.
Yeah, he's not that cool guy.
He's not a felon. There's nothing cool. I mean, there's a lot of things cool about Shang-Chi, but they're different cool things.
Yeah, exactly.
And like people can have like if you can have Iron Man and Captain America in a movie, they're two white guys.
Yeah.
Like no one's confused about them. Why can't you have Shang-Chi and Iron Fist in the same movie, right?
Again, to come back to like the network this is going to be on, Netflix, like you can't have an episode of Master of None about how you can't have more than one Indian on television,
right.
and then come up with this idea that we can't have two Asian characters on television, you guys. No, like the amount of like meta tone deafness there would be laughable almost. Like it's like giving all the think piece writers nothing but ammunition for months and months and months. Don't do it, because it's a bullshit. It's a bullshit argument, but it's also like of all the places for it to happen, it's not the place.
So the purpose of this episode tonight, if you haven't figured out, is to shoot down all of the counter arguments that people have come up, all the straw men that people come up with to say why Danny Rand can't be Asian American in our proposed Iron Fist television series that is due out hopefully soon. That's the other thing, we don't know when Marvel will get to Iron Fist, hopefully soon. The last thing I want to kind of touch on is like some of the people who've been tweeting, as I mentioned earlier, this was a conversation that was really, you know, just kind of snowballed over the last couple of weeks on Twitter. And some of the people who've been kind of like spearheading that conversation, I think, are pretty important people. So like one of the people was Gail Simone, who writes comics, who's one of the biggest names in comics right now. She actually tweeted out several times about how when she would love to write an Iron Fist where Iron Fist was Asian. I actually tweeted out to her my post about Cole being and several other actors being considered for the role, and then the artist for Immortal Iron Fist, David Asia, actually tweeted back saying that was a great idea. Lexi Alexander, who was supposed to be on the show tonight but couldn't be with us because she is knee-deep in prep work on Supergirl, which is awesome. We're happy for you, Lexi. She's been one of the most vocal proponents for casting an Asian American Iron Fist. In fact, you know, Lexi's a martial artist herself. A woman of color. I think this is what we want, and it's not like, you know, we're not saying Marvel should just kind of like bow down to like the SJW social justice warriors for doing this, right? This is not the point. Like the idea is that, like, as Charles and Cole have been saying, it just makes sense. It's a better story, right? Like how would you respond to those like anti-SJWs, Charles?
It's not just a better story for like common sense and logic's sake, because literally we could do a flow chart of just the weirdness, like you said, white kid, Himalayas, hiking around, gets adopted by another white guy, just what are the chances? But to look at Marvel as to look at like what Marvel is doing as a business, sort of making money hand over fist with superhero movies. Making their business better for the consumers. People compare Marvel and DC all the time. If you look at DC's heroes, sorry DC folks, your slate's looking pretty uniformly white for the foreseeable future, by virtue of the fact that that's just who your characters are, and the studios have decided to stay with that palette. Exceptions being Cyborg and Jon Stewart. But I mean, that.
Well, I have to stop you there and give props to DC for casting Jason Momoa to play Aquaman and getting an Asian American director.
Yes.
So I mean,
here's the thing. Another example of a character whose ethnicity was never always like their ethnicity was. I don't want to say mutable. Aquaman's one of those characters like Iron Fist who exists in a space where they can be reimagined as another race, as is what happened with Jason Momoa. Right, and it makes perfect sense. Everyone's like, of course Jason Momoa is Aquaman. Why wouldn't he be? Like, Jason Momoa looks so at home in the ocean, make him Aquaman. The idea that you would have, you know, a character of Asian descent who becomes the chosen one of another mystical dimension, inhabited, you know, by martial arts, influenced by real world Asian culture, again, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And so just again, like step back and like look at the story that's being told. Asian Iron Fist, yes, 1,000 times yes.
Cole, we're going to leave you with the last word. So if you had to walk into a room with Marvel, what would be your pitch for why you should be Danny Rand? And I mean, I don't want to like, you know, presume that yeah, I don't want to like spoil it for if you ever do get in that audition room. But what would be your like elevator pitch to the studio heads at Marvel and Netflix to say why you should be, or not necessarily you, but why Iron Fist and Danny Rand should be Asian American, but maybe you.
Well, I mean, everything we've been talking about, it's just, you know, it makes for a better narrative. It's more current. It's 2015, not the 70s. It makes more sense. His, you know, the cultural reconnection of an Asian American connecting to his roots. He's still a fish out of water in that sense. And I don't know. I mean, the martial arts is kind of our thing. He becomes the greatest Iron Fist ever, champion ever. He's like the first ever to slay Shu Lao or Shao Lao. So I mean, it's kind of a slap in the face to be like, you know, like. Someone else, you know, can do your art way better than we ever could. You know, it has more potential than all of us. I don't know. So I just think, yeah, just all those reasons, and it would be a breakthrough in so many ways, and it'd be the first, you know, Asian American superhero that they have.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but at least for me at the Nerds of Color, we have all of our fingers and arms and every other extremity crossed that happens, and that Marvel and Netflix is out there listening, and that that they actually are opening the casting call for ethnicities beyond just another white guy named Chris. So that said, I want to thank my guests for this evening, Charles Pulliam-Moore. You can find him on Twitter at Charles Pulliam. You can also read his works at fusion.net. I also want to thank my other guest, Cole Horibe. You can find him on Twitter at dance9cole and at colehoribe.com. And I want to thank you for listening and watching the Nerds of Color's Hard NOC Life. I will see you next time.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard NOC Life, comics, movies, and TV, yo. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard NOC Life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share the interest together with a similar kind. When they said Don Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments, and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NOC.